In my other job, amongst other things, I sell pizza ovens. It's not uncommon that after someone's bought a pizza oven, they ring up and say, I've got my pizza oven, now what? So what I've decided to do with this video is a 3-step series on how to start cooking pizzas using your portable pizza oven. The first step that I recommend clients do is after they've set up their oven and they've got it ready and they've either tried to cook and they've struggled or they haven't even started, is get your pizza oven going, follow these setup instructions, temper the stone and feel comfortable with starting and stopping the oven. The very next thing I recommend, if you're a novice at making pizzas, is buy some frozen pizzas. And the reason I recommend this is what you want to do is get used to just using the pizza oven because it's quite an involved process. Now, I'm not recommending any frozen pizzas in particular. If you have some favorites, buy those or just buy something randomly. I'd probably suggest going for something that might be or might represent a bit better quality. I'm not endorsing any in particular, but I just bought 3 random pizzas here. So what I'm doing is I'm not following the instructions on the pizza box for these pizzas. I'm letting them thaw. Usually you put these in a domestic oven frozen, but I'm letting these thaw because when we are cooking at 500 degrees Celsius, we're cooking very rapidly and I don't really want to put in something that's already frozen. Because what I fear is that I'll burn the outside and still have an uncooked inside. And when we're cooking with pizzas normally, we'll be doing that with obviously unfrozen pizzas. This is once we graduate to doing a pizza that we've made ourselves. Once we've got the oven set up and started, we just wait for that to come up to temperature. Next thing we do is just make sure that all of our tools are ready. So I've got the peels ready, I've got my turning peel and launching peel. I've got the tray that I put the pizzas on just to let them steam off a bit before I chop them. I've got my chopping board and chopper ready to go, and I've got my plates. So we need to sort of set all this sort of stuff up just so that it'll all flow nicely. This is a valuable little tool. It's typically used as a commercial grade salt shaker. We tend to put flour in there, and this is quite good for dusting the peels before we put pizzas on, and also the workbenches. It just stops a lot of mess. It actually reduces the mess that we end up with to get a fine dusting. I found that using the frozen pizzas, they tend to be a little bit moist underneath if I haven't let them defrost properly. So sprinkling a little bit of this onto the peel just helps them to slide off a little bit better. Okay, so I've just measured the oven temperature and that's up to temperature. So I'm going to turn that down to low. I do this normally with normal pizzas. So flames down low. I've got the peel dusted. Got one of these pizzas ready to go, so I'll just put that on there. A bit hard to do this single-handed. So what you want to do is make sure that's going to slide off without a problem. So then, just a matter of putting that in there. And then, now this is going to cook pretty quickly. So what we want to do is just get under there and just start turning it. Now I'm using the turning peel, and that was nicely dried, so it didn't stick to the stone or to the peel. So this is a pre-made frozen pepperoni pizza. You can already start to see, because this pizza oven gets so hot, it's already starting to cook very rapidly around the edges, and those pepperoni pieces are actually curling up already. So you want to keep this probably further back from the heat, which is right at the back. And we just keep turning that around. Look at the base. The base is still needs a bit of cooking. that aside for a moment. Progress so far, still needs some cooking, but you can start to see just how, if you're not on top of it, these are going to burn. So I do recommend just practicing with these pizzas, and if you've got an Ooni 16, this is a particularly hot oven. An Ooni 12 is a bit cooler, but the Ooni 16 gets very hot very quickly, very evenly. The 12 is much hotter at the back and not as hot at the front. So sometimes with these smaller pieces, that's probably a better way to go. And a little bit of dark brown's good, a little bit of burn's not so good. And if you want to cook the top a little bit more, you actually want the base cooked just a touch more. So I'm keeping it in there. You just lift that up a little bit, up closer to the top, and that with the convection will start to cook the top a little bit. You can hear that going. I don't know if you can hear that. Of course, if you've got a party with lots of kids and you need to put a lot of pizzas through, you know, sometimes frozen pizzas are not a bad alternative to doing it yourself. So I'll just put it there, let it cool off a little bit, and we'll start putting the other pizzas through. Now this is the kind of thing that we're trying to practice for. So this I've overcooked and I've burnt it slightly. Here I've got a nice bit of puffiness, and that's actually the kind of colour that you want. So there's a bit of practice required, and this is actually a really easy way to practice before you start getting into too many different and complicated processes. I'm going to show you how to make an authentic sauce. It's actually very, very simple to make, and it is the real deal when it comes to authenticity. There's a couple little changes to it, but that's pretty minor. When I talk about authenticity, this is a traditional Neapolitan pizza sauce. So the beauty about this sauce is the simplicity, and it's better than actually buying ready-made pizza sauce. Ready-made pizza sauces are usually based on tomato paste. They're very dry, got a lot of added flavors and preservatives. This is dead simple to make. It's like a 2-minute job at the most, and you'll just see for yourself. Now, you've got a few options here. What I use is some very simple ingredients. We have canned tomatoes, salt, oregano, and basil leaves. Now, when it comes to getting the tomatoes, if you want to go ultra authentic, you get San Marzano tomatoes, and you want the DOP, which is the certified origin product. These are peeled. They have to be peeled tomatoes. So and these are whole tomatoes. So they need, if they're whole tomatoes, you want them peeled, but also then you have to mush them up, usually by hand, or you can use a little stick mixer. But we're not going to use that today. We're going to use something else that's even easier. And I'm not promoting the Mutti brand, but these just happen to be really good, and it's what we use all the time. So if you go for Mutti polpa, polpa means diced, minced, pulped, and these are they say finely chopped tomatoes. These have skins removed. You can't use anything that's got skins still attached. I've seen some product in the supermarket that has chopped tomatoes with the skins attached. You definitely don't want that. You don't want the skins, they make the sauce bitter. So that's why we use this one. This is pretty good. The flavor is very, very similar to the DOP San Marzano tomatoes. They're not San Marzano, but they're pretty good. I'm gonna show you how to do this. This saves a lot of time. You don't have to mince them up and you don't get filthy in the process. So that's one product that we're doing. The other thing that we need is, I use a teaspoon and a half of salt, then using some oregano, some dried chopped oregano, and again I'm just using one and a little bit. I don't want too much oregano, but that's quite good. And then what I've got is about 6 freshly picked basil leaves. So you want fresh basil. We often buy just basil plants from the supermarket, and you can get, they're very inexpensive, and you get some really lovely fresh basil leaves. So that's the basis of our ingredient mix, which is pretty basic. Just open this up. So you'll see that this is all just already finely chopped. Not too watery either. Sometimes if we've found in the past, if we use whole tomatoes, not this stuff, but other whole Italian peeled tomatoes, sometimes they've got quite a lot of liquid. You actually just want to remove a bit of that, because otherwise you're going to end up with a really messy pizza sauce. It's just too liquidy and it won't allow the base to cook properly. But this seems to be the right mix. So we just add the ingredients. We've got the tomatoes. Actually, I'll just show you the consistency. You can see the consistency I'm talking about. It's not too watery. Especially what you will do is mix that all together as you use it on your pizzas, because sometimes the liquid will separate. So you just mix that together and you can actually see that consistency is pretty good. So to that we'll just add our salt, put our oregano in there, and then with the basil leaves, what you need to do with basil leaves is just roll them in your hands like that. That just bruises them and you stick them in. And that actually releases a lot of the fragrance and flavor from the leaves. If you just put them in whole, they won't release nearly as much flavor. So I haven't been keeping a track of the time, but I think I'm in the, if I wasn't talking, I'd be well within a minute at the moment. And all we do is mix all this together. And I can smell, it's really fragrant just standing above it, just from that basil being rolled in my fingers. It's very, very fragrant. That combined with the oregano is perfect. We don't need to cook this because the tomatoes have already been cooked in the tin, and I can even try this, which it tastes absolutely perfect. It's just like pizza sauce, because it is pizza sauce, of course. So what I'm going to do with that, and it will taste a little bit extra salty, but don't forget, when you spread this out on a pizza, you'll have other toppings, you'll have the dough and all that sort of stuff, which will help to tamp down the overall saltiness of the sauce. But it'll balance all out between all the other ingredients like the cheese and the dough and so forth. So all we need to do with this is let it sit for about half an hour, and that'll help the flavors infuse. You could leave it, put it in the fridge, cover it, put it in the fridge, leave it for quite a few hours, or even put it in a jar and freeze it, and it'll last for ages. So I find that one of these tins will do, will be good for about 8 pizzas. We can make 8 pizzas from one of these tins. So that's that. This is what we're going to be using in stage 2 and 3. So stage 2 is where we just buy a simple ready-made dough ball from the supermarket, and we use our own sauce because it's a lot easier and better quality than buying pizza sauce. And we use this in stage 3 where we made our own pizza dough. So we're progressing on to step 2 of making pizzas and taking the easy route to making a great pizza. First, just to recap, step 1 was buying ready-made frozen pizzas that we thawed, and the idea of using that was to just get used to cooking those pizzas very, very quickly at very high temperatures in our pizza oven. So we've already done our sauce, which you can see that we just did a moment ago. So this is going to be instrumental in step 2 and step 3. So that's going to be common between the two. The other thing that'll be common is cheese. So you've got a few choices here. You can buy, we're going to be using mozzarella. I'm not worried about using buffalo mozzarella or anything like that. Just go and buy some simple mozzarella, but you've got two types that you can buy. There's the dry type of mozzarella, which is a bit yellowish. It's dry and it's usually in a little vacuum sealed wrap. Now that is fine to use, but the end result is that's going to be a little bit stretchy and it'll put out quite a bit of oil when it's heated. So what we tend to use is something a little bit more traditional. It's a wet style of mozzarella. In this case, this is called bocconcini. So you can see it there. And bocconcini are basically, bocca just means mouth, and anything with ini on the end of it usually means small. So these are small, bite-sized mozzarella balls. We just happen to like these. You can get large size mozzarella balls. When you get them in a tub like this, they're in the whey, so they're in liquid. So your mozzarella bocconcini is going to be quite wet. So that's quite a wet thing. So what we do is we try and drain it and let it dry out, and we also pat it dry so that we don't end up with a puddle of water on our pizza, because that can happen. If that happens to you, then just have a look at the cheese, because that's probably where it's coming from, or the sauce if it's too liquidy. And if you remember when I was talking about the sauce, if you see far too much liquid and it's a bit hard to get rid of, then just spoon out that extra liquid, that like the watery component, and you just want a little bit more of a slurry. So if you go back to having a look at this kind of thing, it's more of a slurry, especially when you mix it all around rather than a liquid. You see how thick that is when it comes off the spoon. So that's key, otherwise we end up with a puddle of water, and we don't want a puddle of water. What you'll see my wife doing when she's preparing the pizzas is she likes to tear these apart like this and spread them onto the pizza. Rather than putting a big lump, if you put a big lump, it's actually not going to melt, not in that time. So this, having small pieces like this will help it melt. So we've got the cheese, we've got the sauce, and you also need basil leaves. So fresh basil leaves are the way to go. We've already put basil into our sauce, but that was a different type of thing. We're not actually going to crush these basil leaves. And there's two schools of thought on this. So you can choose whichever you like. We typically put our basil leaves on a raw, uncooked pizza and cook it with the pizza. Some people put the basil leaves on the pizza after it's come out. I just happen to prefer it. My wife happens to prefer it cooked with the pizza, but that's neither here nor there. You're also going to need a little bit of olive oil because you're going to swirl that on top. So if we progress with the second part of what we're doing, so what I recommend is you can typically find these pizza dough balls at your supermarket. I'm not promoting any brand in particular. This one does the job. They're actually not too bad. We still prefer the taste we get from our homemade dough, but these are pretty good, and you should be able to find those in most supermarkets. And each dough ball, you know, in Australia, these things cost $2 or something like that, $2.50. There's one dough ball in here, and it's usually 250 grams. So it's a little bit bigger than the dough balls we've been making, but it's actually a really good way to get started. These also freeze well, so if you buy them from the supermarket and you want to use them later, throw them in the freezer, they'll be fine. Take them out, put them in the fridge for the night from the day before, and then leave them out for an hour or two before you want to use them so they come up to room temperature and they become soft and pliable. Half the problem is trying to get out of the plastic bag because they're really quite sticky. So my wife's an expert at that, or basically I'm too lazy to do it, and she's really good. So she's going to do that. And so we're going to move on next. So we're going to be using that dough made by other people with bocconcini, with our sauce, with the olive oil, and with the basil. And that part is all common to us using our own dough, which we're going to show you in step 3. So you can see it's actually quite a sticky little beast, but that's okay. Should get that out of there eventually. So it's just a matter of putting a little bit of flour down to try and absorb some of that moisture, make it less sticky, and rolling around into a ball. And look, the instructions on this say to leave it out after you've done this, coated in olive oil and aside for an hour or so. We're just going to cover it with some wrap at the moment, just leave it here for a short while just to get its shape, because it's important to get it into that round shape. And that smooth finish on the top, that's actually going to be the bottom of the pizza, because the bit that's been tucked underneath is quite rough, and that's actually better for holding the sauce, and this is actually better for cooking, so it doesn't puff up with air bubbles. If you've ever seen pizzas that puff up with air bubbles in the middle, it's usually because they've put the dough ball around the other way. We tend to find that some of these doughs are a little bit more stretchy and a little bit more sticky, so they do require a little bit of added flour, but they're not too hard to get into shape. And if you have any little holes like that, you just patch them up. This is the time to do it. You don't want to have them develop when you've got sauce on top, because you'll never patch those holes. And just the same as with the dough you'll see next, to stretch, the stretching technique's the same. You can hold the rim up in the air, or you can use your knuckles like this to help to stretch the top part, and for gravity to stretch the bottom part. So it's getting quite thin now, and again, it's not uncommon for those little holes to pop up, and all you need to do is just fold it over and stick those down. You want to also make sure that the dough doesn't stick to the bench top. You don't want to overflour it. There's a bit of a balancing act, and it comes with a little bit of practice. You don't want to over top it. Now, before you start putting sauce on, you just want to make sure that you've got the right shape, you've got the right size. We are looking for somewhere around 11 inches. Just by comparison, this peel is 12 inches. So when that goes on, it's a little bit shorter than the 12 inches. So it's around 11 inches. It's a 250 gram dough ball. If you were keen, you can really stretch it out to 12 inches, that's not a problem, but we find with these ovens that 11 is pretty good. Now, you just want to make sure that before you put the sauce on, there's two things. One is that pizza doesn't stick to the bench top. So just dust that lightly, and just so it can slide around. That way you can slide it onto the peel more easily. And then with the sauce, you just want to stir that around, make sure that the water hasn't separated, and if it has, put it back in. And this is a thing that's common with this dough and the dough that we make that I'm showing you next, that if you want a big rim, big puffy rim, you keep the sauce way away from the edge. And if you want a smaller rim but a bigger looking pizza, you take the sauce close to the edge, maybe a centimetre, half an inch away from the edge is typical. But if you want a really big rim to puff up, then you keep it about 2 centimetres or an inch, 2.5 centimetres or an inch away from the edge, and you'll get a really big rim. One thing I've done is pre-dust the peel. So this is a launching peel that we use. I've just dusted it lightly with some flour. I find that these are pretty good. These are available at kitchen shops. They're typically used as a salt shaker, but we like to put flour in there. That way we don't get a big mess, because you always get a lot of flour everywhere. And if you're not a fully experienced pizza chef, you might be throwing out quite a lot more dough than you would. And we do a figure 6 with the olive oil. And this is a bit where we need to be a bit careful because we don't want that to stick, and we want to just shape that. Can you hold that for me? Thanks. So we just shape that to get a nice round pizza. And that's like at 11 inches or so. And the other thing you want to do is you want to do this. You see how that's moving? That's not going to stick, and that's important. The thing we do just before we launch that, just make sure that it's not sticking, the pizza's not sticking to the peel. And we put that into the oven. And we make sure that we turn our Ooni down to low when we've got the pizza in. Now, what I do here is put the peel in to just warm that up, so that gives me a chance to slide it under a little bit easier. You can see how it's really floppy. I mean, this is just like, this is the characteristics for cooking. This is just like with homemade dough. What we're going to do is I tend to like to turn these around quite a lot. If you leave it in one spot, it's really prone to burn, especially with a Coda 16. I find with a Coda 12, you can actually leave it a bit longer. It's a cooler oven, whereas the 16 is a very, very hot oven. And I find with the Coda 12, I don't usually turn the gas down, or the amount of gas down. I usually leave it on high all the time in between pizzas and when I'm cooking them. On the Coda 16, I tend to put it on high in between cooking pizzas. But with both, one thing I do is I always rotate. I do find that the dough that we buy from the grocery store tends to puff a lot, so we get a lot of this, more so than our own dough. But sometimes it's a bit uncontrolled. It sort of can get really wild in some spots and not so wild in others. Just want to make sure that doesn't burn. Also want to keep an eye on the bottom. The bottom base is looking pretty good. This is nice sort of colour, leopard spotting around there. Let's have a quick look how it's going. Just do a little bit more around there just to make that nicer. And I think that's pretty much done. So we just put that on a cooling rack. Only for a few seconds. We just leave that on the cooling rack just for a few seconds. You can see we actually got some really nice leopard spotting. It's got some great aroma. So the sauce and the cheese, the basil, the olive oil is all the same as what we would do on the dough that we make ourselves. And you've seen that making the sauce is really, really simple. Now we're just ready to cut the pizza. Cut that. I don't think I cut it through there. There we go. Have a look at this. It's pretty fluffy in the crust. It's got the base looks pretty good. And you know, the finish is good. Let's give that a try. It's pretty good. We'll have to try it against our own dough. I'd suspect our own dough is probably better. I tend to find it's has a bit of a doughy consistency to it rather than that sort of thinner pizza kind of consistency. So we'll wait and see, but hey, that's pretty good. I reckon you're at 90% of restaurant quality pizza with this kind of dough. Of course, the sauce and the cheese really make it much more like a normal pizza because that's the taste of a proper Neapolitan pizza. But the dough's not bad. Certainly good for starting with, and certainly I'd probably recommend if you're in a pinch, use this. But wait and see how we do the other dough at home and see if you can do that, because that will give you a superior result. So this is step 3 in making a pizza, or the easy way to make a pizza. So you can look at, on the screen there's a couple of links now to how to make very authentic Neapolitan style pizza dough. But what we've evolved to quite a lot of the time is a very simple method. It's not the most authentic, but it gives you a really great finished product, and it's very, very, very simple to do. So this is great for a beginner or for someone who's struggling with making their pizza, or for people like us that time matters and it's just a lot simpler. So I'm not endorsing any brand in particular. This is just a local brand in Sydney, Australia. What we're using is a bread mix, which is good for pizza and focaccia. So this is really simplified because what you get in there is the flour mix and the yeast sachet. So that's ready to go. And for us, 500 grams of this will give us 4 pizzas once we're finished and we've added the water, because we end up adding about 300 mils of water. So that's the 3 parts. What they've done with this type of mix, as opposed to just getting flour and then adding your own salt and adding all the constituent parts, this already has the ingredients. It's got the flour, the canola oil, sugar and salt already added to the flour mix. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll start mixing this. You can see how easy it is to make. We're going to be using a mixer instead of hand mixing it. So this process is ultra simple. The part that takes the longest here is actually proving it, and today we're going to do that for 6 hours. So it's the same day kind of mixture. If you leave it for 24 hours, that's even better, but 6 hours is fine. After 6 hours, the dough has had a chance to ferment and to relax, so it's easier to stretch. If you try and go in a bit too quickly, then it's very hard to stretch the dough. It's very elasticy and it tends to pull back. So now we'll just get on with mixing and measuring. Right, so the first thing that we do here is we empty out I'm going to do this with the assistance of my wife. We empty out the flour mix into the bowl, and she likes to make a well in there. And she adds the water in, so that's been pre-measured at 300 millilitres. And she adds the dry yeast, which has come with a packet. So we let this run for 10 minutes after everything's nicely combined. We've let the dough rest for just under an hour, and it's more than doubled in size. So there's a few more processes. It's a fairly simple thing, but there's a few more processes. This will be sort of measured into balls. We'll get 4 dough balls out of this, that I think I said about 210 grams, depending on how things have shifted, but around that much for this mixture. Those balls are then going to go into this plastic container with a lid on. They'll be allowed to then rise a little bit for about half an hour or so, and then we'll stick the whole container with a lid on in the fridge. Then about 6 or so, minimum of around 6 hours, maybe a little bit less, they'll be ready to take out. We need to have them out for about 2 hours to just acclimatise to room temperature. Then there's a little bit of kneading that goes on, or a little bit of adjusting. We let them sit for about half an hour after that, and then we get on with it. Now, this is an important piece of equipment. I bought these at the local supermarket for, I don't know, $10 Australian dollars or something like that. But this will take 4 dough balls, so that's a good thing. That's kind of what you want. You also want some scales. Other than that, you know, a bowl, and you're using all the pre-mixed stuff. So I'll let my wife get on and show you how this is all done. So you can use a little bit of flour if you need, if it's just a little bit wet and sticky. And then she's just going to cut that into quarters. So that's come up at about 177 grams. Just going to try and get that to about 210. Close enough. So then you just want to lightly flour the tub. And just mold that into a ball, shape that into a ball, and always tucking underneath. So you have a nice smooth side on top. Tuck underneath and close it off underneath. So the idea is to try and keep the air out of the ball, but you're trying to make a nice ball. So that will sort of settle and rise and become a lot less sticky as it ages. So now you can actually see from this video how much bigger these balls are now. They've been out of the fridge for a while. They're actually in the fridge for a while. They're out of the fridge for a while now, and they need just a little bit of work. There's a few little tricks that my wife does to these to make them really fluffy, because you kind of want a big fluffy rim. That's the whole point. One of the things we won't be doing in our videos is using a rolling pin. If you use a rolling pin when you're stretching out your dough, you're going to have a flat pizza, unless that's what you're after. So we're not going to be doing that. Anyway, so the idea is to try and make these as fluffy and light as possible, and my wife will show you what we do. So just lightly dust the workbench. And you can see these balls have probably doubled in size at least from when they went in. And if it makes it easier, sometimes you can use a little bit of flour to get them out, but you just need to make sure that you don't compromise the top or the bottom side of the dough balls. So this is a little bit of a trick, pulling it out like that. So it's like grabbing it at the sides, pulling it out, and then folding it back on top of itself. And you do this quite a few times, and that is going to make the world of difference. It's a little trick that we learnt not that long ago. Absolutely makes a world of difference between a pizza that fluffs up and one that doesn't. And then you've got to make a nice round ball with a top like that. She's going to put it back in there. You notice how that has actually collapsed the ball, but that's fine, because that is going to get bigger. We're only doing one at the moment just for the demonstration. We're going to do the others later for dinner, but that will get a little bit bigger, and then we'll show you how to stretch that out a little bit later. Now it's time to stretch and top the pizzas. The technique used to stretch a pizza involves using your fingertips and stretching by hand. You'll notice that my wife is leaving a rim around the edge, so she's not squeezing that, she's just allowing the rest to sort of drop with gravity. The reason you don't squeeze the rim is because you want the air to stay in that rim. So that's whether you're using this dough or the other dough that we've used, which is the bullet dough. So this technique here uses the knuckles to stretch the top part of the dough, and the bottom part is being stretched by gravity. So it's not really a problem. If you get a little bit of a hole, that's fine, but you see how translucent that is? You can see up against the light how much light's going through. That's exactly what we want. With a Neapolitan pizza, they're very, very thin in the center, and they still puff out quite a bit around the rim. So this dough ball is just over 210 grams, and we find that we can actually stretch this to almost 12 inches. So that's getting pretty big. And just by comparison, that peel is designed for a 12-inch pizza, so we're getting pretty close. And we're just patting down any little holes that might be there, because those little holes will open up once you put sauce on them and throw them into the oven. They tend to stretch out. So using that sauce recipe that we showed you earlier, just remember to stir it through, make it all uniform, because the water does tend to separate out. And we'll get about 8 pizzas out of this at least. And a little trick is, if you want a really thick rim, then you leave a big gap like that. And you'll get a really huge rim. But we tend to go for more like this, and you get just an average size rim around the pizza. And we're using bocconcini again, like we did before. They're just small mozzarella balls, just easy to break up. You just break them up like that. Don't throw them on whole, because they just won't melt properly and they won't look right. They'll just be big lumps rather than sort of nice gooey puddles of mozzarella. And we put the basil leaves on the top of the pizza and cook it with the pizza. And the last thing you do is swirl a number 6 of olive oil. And then we just pull it on like this, and we do a final stretch. This is just to get us a nice round shape, like that. You see, this is a 12-inch peel, so we're looking at about 11-inch pizza with this. Okay, so I've just turned the oven down to low, and I'll just place pizza in there. Now this, even though it's on low, is going to cook really, really, really quickly. You can probably see the back starting to puff up. Little trick is you put the turning peel in there just to warm it up, and that helps to slide it underneath very gently, otherwise you might tear it. Especially with the first 2 turns, you find with the first couple of turns the base is still soft and it's prone to tearing. Now you see that starting to heat up now. I'm the sort of person that likes to turn these quite a lot, because I like to get it as evenly cooked as possible. We are looking for leopard spots, but that's still not dark enough. So let's just keep turning it. And by turning it early, you actually get the whole rim to puff up. Otherwise you tend to, if you overcook one section, the rim just blows up in one spot. And then it tends to be a bit flatter in the others. You start to see some of that leopard spotting. You can certainly see everything cooking there. I find it is important to keep the temperature up in between pizzas, to just reheat the stone, to just make sure the stone temperature comes up, so that you can start to see how that's cooking it nicely underneath. And you turn it down so that you don't overcook the top. And use this section here to put it into a cooler area. Notice how we're already starting to get some little burnt areas, which is okay, as long as we don't get too much of it. And I have to tell you, these little extensions at the front are great, because you can bring the pizza out here, give it a bit of a rest. Right, I think that's actually pretty good. I'll put that down on the cooling rack. And the reason we do that is to make sure that the base doesn't get too soggy. I'm only leaving it here just for a moment, but that's a pretty good looking pizza. If you look at, it's puffed up, the base has got a bit of stiffness in it, not too much. You can hear that. Look, if you can't hear it, I can certainly feel it. I can tell it's nice and airy and crunchy. So now it's kind of ready to move over. So just move that straight over. Now I like to just do quarter cuts. Cut through like that. Cut through like that. Now the thing about this kind of pizza is you traditionally cut it in quarters if you're going to eat it by hand. If you're planning to eat it with knife and fork, the traditional way is to leave it uncut and put it on someone's plate. You can do what you like, really. Cut it into quarters, cut it into eighths or sixths, or don't cut it at all. But if you are eating it, the reason that you cut it in quarters is you fold it over like that. Now that's looking more like the eighths size that people are used to. Now I've got to tell you, we'll do the taste test. See if you can see the oven behind me, but that's an absolutely perfect pizza. I'd challenge you, by using the dough recipe that my wife's using and the sauce, to find something that doesn't taste, that making pizza with that recipe doesn't taste like the real thing from Naples. It's pretty good. So my name's Andrew, this is Food Good. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this video with your friends if you've enjoyed watching our video, and if you want to see more of our videos in the future. Once again, thanks for watching. The rocket chopper underneath and slide them off together, and just pretty them up like that. Okay. And that's your perfect, with a hole, Neapolitan margarita. So we're starting to cook that a little bit too vigorously, so what you can do is just tilt it up like this to just, now that is a problem that you can experience if you see that. I've been doing too much talking and not enough cooking.